Today I will discuss measuring gauge. What is gauge? Gauge is simply the number of stitches or rows in a certain measure, whether it is in inches or centimeters. To measure for gauge, it can be helpful to place waste yarn in between two columns of stitches. Avoid the selvage stitches and likely also avoid the second stitch in. These two stitches sometimes have not great tension. And then using a fixed ruler, measure to the nearest 1/8 of an inch between those two marking threads. This swatch just happens to be exactly 5 inches. We are measuring whole columns of stitches here. We are not attempting to divide stitches in half. It is too difficult to, by eye, judge whether there is a half a stitch or a third of a stitch. So measure whole stitches. Count the number of stitches in that measure and then divide the number of stitches by the measurement. This will get you your stitches per inch, and then you can multiply by 4 to get a number to compare to your pattern. It is important that you do not round the number that you get initially per inch. The same can be done for the row gauge. Place waste yarn above the cast on edge and below the bind off edge. Make sure it is in the same row across. Measure to the nearest 1/8 of an inch between those two threads, and then count the number of rows present. You'll divide your number of rows by the measurement to the nearest 1/8 of an inch, and you will not round that number. That will be your rows per inch. You can multiply that by 4, and then you can round that number to get a number to compare to your pattern. I like to use these quilting rulers. They are clear, they come in a variety of sizes, they're very easy to use. Whatever ruler you use, make sure you use a hard ruler that cannot stretch over time. Measuring tapes can stretch and be inaccurate. For more complicated stitch patterns where it is perhaps difficult to count the number of stitches or rows present, make a note of how many stitches you cast on for your swatch and how many rows you worked, and then do the same measurement, excluding the selvage stitches. So if you come in 1 stitch from the edge, subtract 2 from your total number of stitches that you know that you cast on for that swatch. And then the same for the number of rows. Exclude the cast on edge and the bind off edge, and then if you've written down how many rows you've worked, you can measure those rows and not need to count. Measuring whole columns of stitches and whole numbers of rows gives you the most accurate numbers to work with. That was an overview of measuring for gauge. I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.